grandfather and my father were out hunting in the Chaffalay Basin. If you've ever driven across I-10 in South Louisiana, it's that section that's raised above swampland for about 60 miles. It's hundreds of square miles of swampland. It's so big, there's actual islands in the middle of this that have full-size deer that have never seen people before. And so the problem with this area is it looks the same in every single direction. It's very easy to get turned around. I mean, it's perfectly flat. When you hear about the hurricanes hitting South Louisiana, water comes inland sometimes 15 or 20 miles. That's the percent of grade that the land is, where a 12-foot wave just slowly pushes that far inland. The trees look the same in every direction. The bushes look the same in every direction. On numerous occasions, hunters would step off the trail to use the bathroom or something, and then they would get turned around and walk in the wrong direction, and the rest of the hunting party would take hours to try to find them in the swamp, if they would find them at all. That's when the rougarou gets you, and so you have to watch out for him. So my grandfather and my father, they were hunting and they're trying to get back to their boat, and they get to the water's edge, right? They kind of paddled out to this island. They got to the water's edge right where their boat was supposed to be, and the boat was gone. What are they supposed to do? They're in the middle of nowhere. Darkness is coming. It's not like you would want to swim through these waters. There's lots of stuff in the waters that would love the chance at you, and so you don't want to give them that opportunity. And so they get to the water's edge. There's no boat there. And my grandfather, certain that they're at the right spot, pulls out his compass, figures out the bearing, and starts walking out into the water. And a couple hundred feet out there's their boat tied up to the same tree where they had left it. The tree had not moved. One thing I forgot to mention was the Chaffalay Basin is subject to tidal periods. And so the water comes in and out of this just like it does in a bay or at the coast. And so the boat hadn't moved. It was right where it was supposed to be, but the water had come in. The water level had changed. The decision that they were facing is what people in business call the sunk cost fallacy. This is the idea that once you've gone so far in one direction, instead of turning around and trying something different, you go, if I just try a little bit harder, if I just go a little bit farther in this direction, it's all going to work out fine. Now, this story is a case where that actually, in fact, was exactly right. But we've probably all been in that situation where you think you're driving down the wrong road, and you go, well, maybe it's just around the next bend, and then it's not. You go, well, but I'm already this far. If it's around the next bend and then I go back to recalibrate and then have to come back here anyway, it would have been faster to have just gone a little bit further right here, right now. Right? People do the same thing with money. I've invested so much money into a particular project that if I pull out now, I won't recoup my investment. I need to just go a little bit further, and then everything is going to be great. The sunk cost fallacy, it's a bit of a gamble, right? It might pay off. That might be true. Just like in the case of my grandfather, the boat might just be another 100 feet out there into the water. The flip side is you might just be walking into the swamp at night and something gets you. Today we're going to be in Matthew chapter 9. Jesus has just called his disciple Matthew, and he's gone to his house for a meal. And at this meal, he gets interrupted. He's sitting with tax collectors. He's sitting with sinners, and people are interrupting him with questions from the Pharisees, questions from John the Baptist disciples. And so Jesus is kind of moving from this period of obscurity, like in year one of his ministry, he's very obscure, and he's kind of turning a corner here where people are figuring out he's the go-to guy, especially in this region. People are learning who he is and what he can do, and they are seeking him out. It feels like the way Matthew is describing this, it feels like it's just incessant. Today, one of the main encouragements from the text, from this passage, is to take heart. That's the title of the sermon, which essentially means to be encouraged, to be strengthened, to be courageous, and to have faith. It encompasses quite a few of these ideas. It's often just used simply as, hey, be encouraged, stand firm. But I think as we go through the text today, we're going to see it has a little bit of a deeper meaning. Take heart. We need to take heart because the Messiah restores life. In verse 18 and following, it says this. It says, while he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, if I only touch his garment, I will be made well. Jesus turned and seeing her said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report went throughout all of that district. Mark lets us know that this leader who comes up to him is not just any leader. He's a leader in the synagogue there in Capernaum, and he is a leader named Jairus. There's a sense of desperation that Jairus has. The text opens with, while he's saying these things, so assuming that he's still at this dinner party with Matthew, you get the next interruption, which is the leader of the local synagogue. Now, we already know how the Pharisees feel about Jesus being at this dinner. Why do you eat with sinners and tax collectors? That's how they feel about this dinner. And now Jairus shows up and says, hey, my daughter's sick. I need your help. There's desperation. This is the same town where the centurion came to Jesus, the same town where that centurion helped build the synagogue. You wonder if the stories of the centurion, his servant being healed, emboldened Jairus' faith. And he uses the words, he says, she's just died. Depending on what translation you're reading, there are several ways of rendering this, and different translations render it differently. That's because the tense is a little bit ambiguous. So NIV says, has just died. NIV in the same story in Mark says, is dying. And in the same story in Luke in NIV says, was dying. So what is it? Is it has just died? Is it is dying? Is it was died? I would say it doesn't really matter that much. The way that death is understood and handled in the ancient world is not how we understand it today, right? You have a medical professional typically there when someone dies or when they show up on the scene. What do? They check for pulse. And when someone is dead, they say time of death, and they announce the time of death. This is a very modern convention. If you were to look in the book of Hebrews, the author of Hebrews in chapter 11, he goes through a series of people who lived and he describes their death. Here's what he says, similar wordings. Hebrews 11, 22, 21 says, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of his sons, the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, similar word there, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave direction concerning his bones. And so for the ancient mind, the idea of death is not this one fixed point that has a medical definition like we would understand a sort of flatlining to be. It is probably more of this period. Also, the tenses in Greek could quite interchangeably be used from those three different passages in the same story. And so it shouldn't be that problematic for you. But basically he says, look, my daughter has just died, but if you come, lay your hand on her, she will live. He has faith, right? The faith is there, but compare this for a moment to what you remember of the faith of the centurion. What does the centurion say? Jesus says, I will come, and the centurion says, no. I understand authority. I'm a man of authority. You speak the word. I don't even need you to come. You just say the word, and I trust you. It'll be done. Right, so Jairus has faith, not quite to the faith of the centurion, but he has faith. And so Jesus and his party, they are headed that way, and there's an immediate interruption. Interruption in the dinner, now there's an interruption to the interruption. Jesus is in high demand. In this story, there's this woman who comes up who's had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and she just breaks into the story. Now, just so you know how bad she has it, I want to read a little passage from Leviticus to you. This is Leviticus 15, verse 25. It says, if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge of blood beyond the time of her menstrual impurity, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanness. As in the days of her impurity, she shall be unclean. Every bed on which she lies, all the days of her discharge, shall be to her as the bed of her impurity, and everything on which she sits shall be unclean, as in the uncleanness of her menstrual impurity. And whoever touches these things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until evening. But if she is cleansed of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days, After that, she shall be clean. And on the 8th day, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons and bring them to the priest to the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the priest shall use one of them for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for her before the Lord for her unclean discharge. Now, why did I spend so much time reading through a really gross passage in Leviticus? I want you to understand how bad she had it, right? This is not a simple thing for her. This is not a private medical issue that she could deal with. She would be ostracized from her very home. Imagine the impracticality of everything she touches becomes ceremonially unclean, and everyone who touches what she touches also becomes unclean themselves. This is something that is a heavy weight that would have rested on her that she would have known about. She would have had to be outside the camp. If they touched what she touched, they're unclean. She couldn't go home. She couldn't go to temple. She couldn't hold her kids if she had them. There's an otherwise secular Jew, his name is A.J. Jacobs. He wrote a book where he took a 1-year experiment. It called it My Year of Living Biblically. And basically he tries, as a modern day non-practicing Jew in New York City, to live out what he understands the Torah to be as best he can in the city. He describes hilarious events. He even got to stone somebody one time. He just threw some rocks at them because they got in a little kerfuffle. But his wife was not on board with this experiment, and she was so frustrated with him at one point during her time of the month, she went and touched every single chair and every single bed in the house, so he had to go stay somewhere else. Right now, this is a humorous story, but this illustrates how tragic her life would have been, right? It's not a social experiment for her. It's not a one time out of a 1-year experiment for her. It's 12 years of her life. She's pushing through the crowd, touching people. Everyone she touches, she's making unclean. And then she has the gall to touch Jesus. A lot of times we try Jesus like he's the next diet trick. You try this, you try that to try to get rid of those few pesky pounds. You keep working and you just try the next thing. Have you tried no carbs? How about vegan? How about cutting gluten? What about Jesus? How about a diet pill? What about a program? What about intermittent fasting? You see how easy it is just to insert his name like the next solution? Remember, Jesus is not a patch on our life. He isn't trying to make what we have better. He's giving dead men new life entirely. What does it look like for us to have the faith of this woman? This desperation. What is it to try Jesus like our lives depend on him? What does it mean to try Jesus when it breaks social convention, when it's embarrassing, when it makes those around us angry? She took this approach. His words to her, take heart. This is not just an encouragement. It's actually in a command. He's commanding her. It's an imperative. Take heart. Jesus used this word more than once in his ministry. Earlier in this chapter in verse 2, it says, behold, some people brought him a paralytic lying on a bed. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, take heart, your sins are forgiven. Jesus uses this again when he's a few chapters from now, when he's out on the Sea of Galilee. The disciples are again on the sea. They're again terrified. You'd think they stay off the sea by now. And this is where Jesus walks out on the water. And when they see him, the words he says is, take heart, it's I, do not be afraid. He commands Peter to go out on the water. And Peter goes out and he becomes afraid and he says, Lord, save me. And Jesus says, O you of little faith. Just a chapter ago, the disciples are out on the sea when a storm comes. And they say, save us, we are dying. Jesus asks them, he says, why are you afraid? Again, he uses the same words to them. Oh, you of little faith. Take heart. This means to be encouraged, to be courageous. But in all of these stories, we see where fear is the opposite of faith. So saying take heart is not that far off from saying have faith. In fact, in response to her faith, verse 22, he says, your faith has made you well. From her perspective, she needed to touch Jesus. From Jesus' perspective, though, the healing is simply the result of her faith. She had faith, and he responded to her faith. There's no formula here. He says, your faith has made you well. Literally, this could be translated, your faith has saved you. It's the same word. Her risky move, her move of throwing herself on the mercy of Jesus, it paid off. Her faith saved her. The healing was instantaneous, and it was by the word of Jesus. So the story moves on from the interruption, and it picks up the original line with Jesus going to Jairus' house. Whatever the right words for the timing of Jairus' daughter's death, whether it is dying, has just died, or is dead, she is now dead. They have a funeral procession underway, complete with flute players and a crowd of mourners. There's some Jewish commentary on the Old Testament, and one of these says, this is a quote, says, even the poorest man of the Jewish people may not provide fewer than 2 flutes and a lamenting woman, which is customary to hire for a funeral. So this was just a very common thing. This is not just there's simply music at the house. This is a funeral procession that's there at the house. To them and everyone else, she is dead. And Jesus' response is, she's not dead. She's just sleeping. Now, I don't know if Jesus is just trying to downplay the death, because every other clue in the story says she's in fact dead. But whatever his reason, he says she's not dead, she's sleeping. And the crowd now turns on him. They start laughing at him. Essentially, they're mocking him. They laughed at him, but it says he put the crowd out. They thought it was ridiculous for him to show up after the fact. Sure, they had seen him do a lot of miraculous healings. They had seen him raise a paralyzed person and help him walk again. They had seen people who were possessed by demons be cleaned of their demons. But the idea of someone who's dead being raised to life, this was unthinkable. It says when the crowd had been put outside, that's a very gentle way of putting it. This is a very strong word. This word is used, it's the same word it says when he cast out demon. It's this word right here for put out. When it's in classic literature, when it talks about invading armies being repelled, it's this word right here. Jesus used this word a few chapters ago when he was talking about the messianic banquet, how there's going to be those seated at the table from the east and the west. This was in response to the centurion's faith, and he said, but the sons of the kingdom will be thrown out. It's this word right here. The crowd was wrong in their understanding. They were premature in their judgment. They were doubting Jesus and his power. What do you do with people like that? You put them out. The doubters are shut out, and Jesus heals her. One of the other accounts says that there were 5 people in the room, but it's not these people. There's people who are put out and not allowed to see whatever this looks like, and there's a few people who are believing who are allowed to stay in the room. Perhaps this is an example of Jesus living out what he talks about, not casting your pearls before swine. Maybe he's living this out. Now, before you think this is overly special, there are several other prophets in the Old Testament who raised someone from the dead. Most notably, Elijah and Elisha each raised someone from the dead. Later in the book of Acts, Peter raises someone from the dead. But for them, this would have been the most amazing thing that they had seen thus far. Take heart, because the Messiah restores sight. The story continues, verse 27. He says, as Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying aloud, have mercy on us, Son of David. When he entered the house, the blind men came in, and Jesus said to them, do you believe that I am able to do this? And they said to him, yes, Lord. Then he touched their eyes, saying, according to your faith, be it done to you. And their eyes were open. And Jesus sternly warned them, see that no one knows about it. But they went away and spread his fame throughout all of that district. Here it says, when he entered the house, it makes you wonder, is Jesus trying to kind of escape the eyes of the street? Is the crowd growing too much where he doesn't really say anything until he gets into the house? Perhaps. But they call out to him with this title, Son of David. If you go back to Matthew 1 in the genealogy, it uses this phrase that Jesus is the Son of David. This is taking on a messianic significance. They're calling him by a messianic title. And he says, do you believe? The word do you believe, or the way that it's stated, it's a little bit of a tricky conjugation in that it could be stated legitimately as a question. That is an absolute legitimate translation. However, there's also a sense in which it could be translated as a command. which doesn't completely change the meaning, but it has a certain nuance to it, right? Instead of saying, do you believe? Jesus walks in and says, believe that I'm able to do it. And what is their response? Yes, we believe. We don't think of faith as something that can be commanded. We think of, well, faith is a private thing that I get to choose to believe, or if you convince me strong enough, I will relinquish this. I'll kind of like surrender it and give it to you. But here we see Jesus, if it is this, saying, believe. Commanding them to. This is similar to verse 22 where he says, take heart. That take heart, it's a command. Hey, take heart, I'm here. Healings thus far have been in response to faith, which is what he says right here. According to your faith, be healed. In chapter 8, verse 1 through 3, we see that the leper seeks out Jesus and asks, if you are willing, will you heal me? In 8:13, we see Jesus respond to the centurion's faith. In 8:26, Jesus calms the storm, but as he's calming the storm, he looks at the disciples. This is an opposite example. He chides them for their little faith that they had. In chapter 9, 6 to 7, Jesus raises the paralytic and he obeys Jesus' command to rise and walk. That one's a little bit more implicit, but it's based on faith. In 9:22, this passage, Jesus heals the woman with the issue of blood based on her faith. In 9:18, Jairus has faith enough to ask. And here we say, here in verse 28, it says, do you believe that I'm able to do this? All of these things are based on faith. We're seeing where Jesus is allowing people to choose. He's presenting them with who he is, and he's essentially asking people to respond. Do you believe or not? What will you do? And we see in these stories where there are multiple kinds of responses. He commands them, hey, don't tell anybody about this. But verse 31 says they went ahead and spread his fame throughout that district anyway. Take heart because the Messiah restores speech. Verse 32 says, and they were going away, as they were going away, behold, a demon-possessed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds marveled, saying, never was anything like this seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, he casts out demons by the prince of demons. A demon-possessed man who was mute. Here we see in the text that deafness is a result of the demon. Now, we don't want to over-spiritualize sickness. Some people do. They go, well, here's an example, and so that's how all sickness is. Even in the scriptures, that's not how it is. There's another story of a deaf mute in the book of Mark, and there's no mention of any demonic activity. There are lots of healings in the Bible that there's no mention of demonic activity. However, we can't assume that never, ever is demonic activity not involved in someone's illness. In this case, this particular one, it is. Sometimes people go, well, the people back then just didn't have science. They didn't understand, so they spiritualized everything. If you're sick, everything's demonic. But actually, the fact that we have one story in the gospel saying this one was related to a demon, and then we have others where they're not related to a demon, shows that's actually not how they thought about things. They understood the difference between a demonically inspired illness and one that was not. This isn't a case of the primitive mind assuming everything is demonic. The Bible affirms that the spiritual realm exists, that demons exist, but it also affirms that sometimes people are just sick. We learn something here about demons. We learn that they can inflict harm that presents itself as a kind of disability. Again, this doesn't mean that all disease or all disability is the result of demonic activity, but we shouldn't then take the approach that none of it is. It seems like some of it is. We see the response of the man. Jesus heals him from the demon. What does he do? He starts speaking. We see the response of the crowds. They're marveling. Never have we seen anything like this. But now we see the response of the Pharisees. He casts out demons by the power of demons, by the prince of demons. We see here that people have different responses to the work of Jesus based on what is in their heart. Said differently, putting yourself in contact with Jesus and his working is like holding up a mirror to our lives. We are able to see, what do we actually think? When we respond to the work of Jesus with cynicism, with criticism, with mocking, with laughter, that shows us what's in our heart. When we respond with submission, obedience, worship, marveling, faith, This shows us something different about what God has done in our heart. Finally, take heart because the Messiah is here. Verse 35 says, when Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom everywhere, and healing every kind of disease and every affliction. Matthew has just spent the last 2 chapters demonstrating that one verse right there, that he's gone through thing after thing after thing, healing after healing. He's been teaching, he's been healing people, he's been casting out demons. In a couple of chapters from now, John is going to send some people to try to figure out, is Jesus the one that we should be expecting? Is he really the Messiah or not? In chapter 11, verse 4, it says, Jesus answered them, go tell John what you see and hear. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. Jesus has not been doing these miracles in a void. There's a context for this. There's a signal to this. This is a declaration of who he is. Isaiah 35, 5-6 says, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then the lame man shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. These acts that Jesus has been doing, they're not just kind of a parlor trick. He's not a magician or a shaman. Neither is he just trying to present himself as a really powerful religious leader trying to start a movement. He's revealing who he is. This prophecy from Isaiah some 700 years before the life of Jesus. And here we see Jesus line by line by line demonstrating that the prophecy is about him. The Messiah is here, and so we should take heart. What does this mean for us? Our response to Jesus shows us what's in our heart. We've seen various responses that people have had to Jesus. We see the doubt. We see the scribe. The scribe in the previous chapter says, I'll follow you. We see another disciple say, I'll follow you, but let me go bury my father first. We don't get any record in the text. In fact, the way the text implies that they didn't follow him at all. We see the response of the town people after the demon-possessed men were healed and the demons go into the pigs. The town people basically say, please leave. We don't, whether you're true or not, we don't want any of this. We see the mourners at Jairus' house. When they see him, they're mocking him. They're ridiculing him. They're laughing. His word is a reason for derision for them. And then finally, in the Pharisees, we see their conclusion. He's got a demon. That's the only explanation. Satan is giving him this power. There's no other possible explanation. It reveals what's in our heart. How are you approaching Jesus? When Jesus tells you to do something, how do you feel about that? Do you approach it with cynicism? Do you approach it with mockery? This is not the only response to Jesus, though. We also see their faith. We see the centurion and we see Jairus in very similar stories inviting Jesus to their home, wanting them to heal a loved one. We see the paralyzed man where his friends are the ones with the faith and they bring him to Jesus. We see the woman with the issue of blood who's desperately and in a socially awkward way going through a crowd of people to get to Jesus. We see the blind men here seeking Jesus out, calling out to him. This leaves us with a choice. What are we going to do with Jesus? Let me ask you a question I like to ask people a lot. Where are you at in your spiritual journey? This is a good question because sometimes we ask things very basic. Hey, have you prayed to receive Christ into your heart? That's a good question. But for a lot of us, we would say, yes, that happened for us a long time ago. But there's a journey to that point, and there's a journey from that point. Where are we? In our spiritual journeys, there's lots of ups and downs. I mean, I can just say for myself, I've gone through high points where I'm very excited about being a believer, where faith has not been a struggle at all. I can say the opposite is true as well in my life. Times where I felt a deep pain, a deep cynicism, lots of doubt, almost a desire to leave the faith. This is what our spiritual journey has looked like. Where are you at? Maybe you've started it. Maybe you've never started your spiritual journey. Maybe you've encountered so much pain and resistance that you're scoffing at the idea that God can act. During difficult times in our walk, sometimes Sunday can be the hardest day of the week. You come in here and the songs are all, rah, rah, Jesus, and you don't feel it. You go, man, am I the only one? You're not the only one. At the risk of everybody standing, I don't want to say who's feeling cynical right now, but you're not the only one. But what do we do with that feeling? Do we set that aside and say, you know what? I'm down this road. Let me follow anyway. Let me go back to the sunk cost fallacy at the beginning. And I want to talk to those of you who are feeling cynical or who are feeling tired, who are feeling like you've been through the ringer. With Jesus, it's not a fallacy. It's not the fallacy of, well, I've already followed this much, so I may as well keep on, but what if it doesn't work out? It's not a fallacy. That's actually the way it is. Keep going. He allows us to go through times of testing. That is part of it. He allows us to go through suffering and to go through pain and persecution even. That's part of it. But with Jesus, we don't have to worry if I give up and try another road, maybe I was wrong all along, or maybe it's not a gamble for us. Take heart. Have faith. Let me close this in prayer. Jesus, it's such a simple thing to hear from you these words, to take heart or to have faith. And yet that can feel like just a mountain that we're trying to hurdle ourselves up sometimes. God, I pray that you would take those moments in our life where we are feeling desperate and you would focus this towards you, where we would see this woman with the issue of blood and just say, okay, I need that level of intensity of pursuing you. That is what faith looks like, knowing that you are our only hope and not just another fix in a line of fixes. God, we pray that you would restore to us this feeling, restore to us this faith, the desire to want to follow you, to seek you, to see you as the answer, not just another answer. Lord, I pray you would give us this faith, that you would build this, that you would strengthen us. We cannot take heart apart from you giving us heart.